ओ ओ ओ ॐ सहनाववतु सहनौ भुनक्तु सह वीर्यं करवावहै तेजस्विनावधीतमस्तु मा विद्विषावहै। ॐ शान्तिः शान्तिः शान्तिः। सदाशिवसमारम्भां शङ्कराचार्यमध्यमाम् अस्मदाचार्यपर्यन्तां वन्दे गुरुपरम्पराम्। रामो राजमणिः सदा विजयते रामं रमेशं भजे। रामेणाभिहता निशाचरचमू रामाय तस्मै नमः। रामान्नास्ति परायणं परतरं रामस्य दासोऽस्म्यहम्। रामे चित्तलयः सदा भवतु मे भो राम मामुद्धर। समस्तजनकल्याणे निरतं करुणामयं नमामि चिन्मयं देवं सद्गुरुं ब्रह्मविद्वरम् सद्गुरुं ब्रह्मविद्वरम्। गोविन्द माधवा गोपाल केशव गोविन्द माधवा गोपाल केशव जय नन्द मुकुन्द नन्द गोविन्द राधे गोपाल। जय नन्द मुकुन्द नन्द गोविन्द राधे गोपाल। गिरिधारी गिरिधारी जय राधे गोपाला। गिरिधारी गिरिधारी जय राधे गोपाला। घनश्याम श्याम श्याम जय जय राधे गोपाल। घनश्याम श्याम श्याम जय जय राधे गोपाल। गोविन्द माधवा गोपाल केशव गोविन्द माधवा गोपाल केशव गोपाल केशव। बोलिए श्री कृष्णचंद्र भगवान की जय। Hari Om, everyone. Welcome to this session on Living Vedanta, which is Q&A session that we'll be having. And you might be seeing this new setup. So we started our Mahabharata summer Balvihar camp this morning. So we invoked Bhagwan Krishna over here, and we are continuing that and look forward to it over the next 2 months. We have quite a few questions today to go over, and very relevant ones to the topic that we have been studying so far. So let us see how much we can get through. So I'll take the first question and we'll keep going from there. First question is, just want to know what is the difference between Atman and Prana? When people die, we say pranas have gone. Then what about Atma? Is Prana and Atman the same? Are they synonyms? When we say prana, we are referring to the physiological functions of the body, which is also called as the vital force in the body. And when we say Atman, we are referring to the consciousness in which the pranas appear and due to which pranas are enlivened. So pranas themselves are physiological functions, but the substratum of prana is Atman. So they're not same in that way, but it is Atman in which pranas appear and they get enlivened. And in Kathopanishad, it is said, na pranena na panena martyo jivati kaschana itarena tu jivanti. What it said is itarena tu jivanti. That's the main part here. Means the point of or the purpose for which these pranas are functioning is not for its own sake. It is for something else. And that is this Atman. And then we have an example which can help us understand this point, that the question was that when people die, we say pranas have gone somewhere. What about Atma? So Atman does not go anywhere. It is these pranas alone which go transmigrate, because pranas are part of subtle body. So subtle body transmigrates to the next available body. So Bhagwan Shankaracharya ji gives example of the clouds moving, and it seems as though the moon is moving. So pranas are moving, but for us sometimes it appears Atman is moving. So that is the question, and that is the point about difference between pranas and Atman. But one thing about pranas is it is a very close indicator of Atman. So it is used as linga, an indicator to express the consciousness in that particular name and form. Okay, second question is, in the discourses, we had discussed about two levels of reality. And one is Vyavaharika and Paramarthika, right? Vyavaharika Satta and Paramarthika Satta. In Vedanta, there is also mention of Pratibhasika. Can you explain Pratibhasika with examples? So the word Satta, right? We had that two planes, right? The top one was Vyavaharika, transactional, and the bottom one was Paramarthika, the substratum or absolute plane. Satta means plane of reality. That is the word meaning of Satta. In Vedanta, there is Paramarthika Satta, and then there is everything else. Okay. But in our perception, we see that from worldly standpoint, there are some illusions even within that. So there is one more Satta called as Pratibhasika Satta. If you translate in English, the closest we can get is illusory plane. But from which standpoint? Of course, from Paramarthika standpoint, everything is illusory. But Pratibhasika is illusory mainly from our transactional standpoint or Vyavaharika standpoint. Example of that is dream, because it's all seen inside the mind. And few other examples are rope snake. So when you see a rope lying there and the snake appears, on that rope, so that snake is not appearing outside, it's appearing in my mind actually. Although my eyes are seeing that rope, snake is appearing in my mind. That is why if somebody else also looks at that rope, if they have samskaras of garland, they can see that rope as garland, because that garland is appearing in the mind. So that is pratibhasika satta. So wherever sense organs are used to know the world, that is called vyavaharika. And wherever there is no need of sense organs, something is seen directly in the mind, that is called pratibhasika. Okay, this is a simple way of putting it. But remember, both of this, vyavaharika and pratibhasika, are the same from Paramarthika standpoint. If you ask Gaudapadacharyaji, he said there is Paramarthika and then there is everything else. I hope that example was clear. Rope snake example, or dream example, or you can also take silver shell example. Okay, wherever there is this illusion appearing, that is pratibhasika satta. All right. Third question is, what is the essential dharma of one in Vanaprastha ashrama? At the age of 77, and having been striving to spend less time on material world and devote more time and energy on my sadhana of serving others, seeing God clearly in all creation and surrendering totally in devotion to God. I find verse 1866, which is Sarva Dharman Parityajya, from the Gita very appealing to me. What would you advise? So the question is, what is the essential dharma of one in Vanaprastha ashrama? So for those of you who are new, Vanaprastha is considered as the third ashrama. So first one is Brahmacharya, second is Grihastha, third is Vanaprastha, fourth one is Sannyasa. In terms of advice, I would not advise anything different than whatever Guru Parampara and Shastra have advised. And that advice is very clearly given in Bhagavatam, where it is said, Tasmad ekena manasa Bhagavan satvatam patihi shrotavyah kirtitavyascha dhyeyah pujyascha nityada. Means when we get this desire, first of all, it's a very auspicious desire to have. That when some sankalpa comes saying that I need to spend more time doing sadhana, I need to spend more time dwelling on this knowledge, it's a Shubha Sankalpa called as Shubhecha. So we should protect this first, because sometimes it comes, but it also goes away very fast. So we should make sure that we protect this Sankalpa and allow it to grow. And while growing, what are the steps that we can take is given in this shloka. So it says, hold on to this resolve firmly with single pointedness. Means we should make this resolve very strong and hold on to this resolve with only one goal, that I want to know nature of Bhagwan, I want to know my true nature. And then it says the methods are, first is to listen to glories of Bhagwan, to listen to Vedanta, Shravanam. And then it says to discuss. Kirtitavya means also to sing the glory, but mainly to discuss it with a like-minded group of people, so that these ideas keep coming over and over again. Many a times you must have noticed, 1 hour lecture we attend, but by the end of the lecture, if somebody asks us, can you summarize the lecture? Sometimes we say, it was okay, the lecture was good, but I just can't give this whole summary again. So this portion helps a lot, and that is why Gurudev introduced the concept of study groups. That you have listened to something, now discuss it with a like-minded group of people, so that knowledge stays fresh and is more recollectable, it's available to me more. And then whatever clarity I have gotten, on that meditate, dhyeyaha, and then worship Bhagavan. Means my personality also should become that of a sadhaka. Right? So, Shrotavyaha, doing Shravanam, Kirtitavyaha, discussing, singing the glory, Dhyeyaha, meditating on it, and Pujyaha. But last word is Nityada, means regularly for a long period of time. I mean, the sadhana should not be intermittent. Like one week I do, and then I have a break for 1 month, and then again for 1 week I take it up again. It can be for shorter time, but doing it consistently. Okay, next question is, we learn that happiness does not reside in objects. But I see that a huge number of jivas think alike and see or seek happiness in objects outside. And it brings happiness also. For example, a beautiful scenery or a really beautiful child has the power to give happiness to a huge number of people. It is highly unlikely that a calming nature, the scenery, will not give happiness to many. Is it okay to understand that outer objects, maybe a few, can give happiness? Of course, not all objects and belongings, and therefore, some percent of happiness can be derived from outside as well. Interesting. Let us ask the question, who is seeing the scenery? So, first answer would be, my eyes are seeing the scenery. Right? I see a beautiful landscape. The seer is my eyes. But we notice, if my mind is not behind my eyes, we can't see things. Means, you might have noticed on your table, right? You are searching for something and your mind is distracted somewhere. That thing is right in front, but still you can't see it. Eyes have seen it, but because mind is not there, we are unable to see that object. So then we come to the understanding that it's the mind which is seeing that scenery. Now, we realize that when mind is unhappy, that experience also becomes unhappy. I'll give you an example. Whenever we went to, in undergrad school, whenever we went to answer some competitive exam, it used to be in some other city than where we were studying. So let us say it happened to be in a city which is a beautiful city. So first day we go there, we answer the exam, and group of people used to go from the university to that city, answer it, and then come back. Now, for some reason, that test was not so great. What I had expected to do, I could not achieve. And everybody was there. That was a group of friends who had gone. We said, this city, anyway, we have come so far. Let us just, go and see the scenery outside. Let's just go and see a few places, a tourist attraction of landscape here. Now you're sitting in front of that scenery, and one person has aced the test. Your friend has aced the test. And let's say that other person has, or I have not done well in that test. Okay. Same scenery, I'm not able to enjoy. Whereas the other person who has done well in the test is also looking at the same scenery, but he's having great joy. In fact, the joy is even greater probably than if he had to just see that landscape. So what is interesting here is, if happiness was inherent in that object, it would give the same happiness to everybody and at all times. But here we realize that happiness is dependent on the nature of my mind. What thoughts are there right now? With that experience, I'm experiencing the world outside. It's like, sugar, for example, its dharma or the inherent essence is to be sweet. So no matter when you eat sugar or who eats sugar, the taste will always be sweet. But if it's not its nature, then it won't work all the time. Just like in this case where we saw that outside scenery is enjoyable to me only when my mind is pleasant, conducive. Now we can ask one more question. Does mind have its own existence, or does it borrow it from somewhere? So when we ask that question, we realize that mind is dependent on consciousness. And we won't go into details on how this is. Simple reason is, in deep sleep, we see mind is not there, but consciousness continues. The point here is, whatever joy is experienced in the mind does not belong to mind also. It is the nature of consciousness on which mind is dependent. That the nature of consciousness is happiness, and that gets reflected in the mind when desires are quietened. Swami Vidyaranyaji has written one chapter in Panchadashi on this aspect. He says when the mind is calm, Shanta Vritti, when it is there, reflection of consciousness happens in this mind. And he says any joy that we see in this world is all reflection of my own happiness. He calls it Brahmanande Vishayanandam. But the point Vedanta is trying to make here is, it is not denying experiencing happiness at mind level or from objects. It's not becoming too pessimistic about the world. You know, when there is beauty, we enjoy. Only Vedanta, what it's trying to say is that beauty or that happiness is my own nature. Let it not be dependent on some object. Whether that object is there or even if it's not there, my nature is still of happiness. Okay. Next question is, it is said even an Asura or Rakshasa who meets death at the hands of Bhagwan gets instant mukti. In Bhagavatam, it is said that Kalanemi Rakshasa, who was killed by Bhagwan Vishnu in his earlier birth, was born again as Kamsa. Was wondering why he was born again if he had got mukti, and that too as an Asura. So when we say mukti, there are different types of muktis. The mukti that Vedanta is talking about is called Kaivalya Mukti. Another word is Sadhyo Mukti. Right when knowledge takes place, that person is liberated. And nature of liberation is such that there is no coming back and forth. Nasa punaravritte vartate. But there are other types of muktis where there is something called as Salokya Mukti, where we get a loka, a world of our Ishtadevata. And then there is also something called as Samipya Mukti, where you are not only in that world, but you are closer to Ishtadevata. So Jaya Vijaya, the next part of that question was, Jaya Vijaya also were reborn again. So they were having Samipya Mukti, means they were closer to Bhagavan in that loka. So whenever there is other type of mukti, Bhagavan can send them back, just like in case of Jaya Vijaya. But he is very compassionate. He says, if I have sent these bhaktas there, I will also take avatara to help them come back to their own loka. But the main point here is, we need to be convinced that we don't want to come back. That is when Vedanta will start speaking to us more. When we understand Bhagwan's statement, Anityam asukham lokam imam prapya bhajasvamam, where Bhagwan says, having evaluated the nature of this world, the nature of this physical body, having maturely thought about it, he says you pursue the path of moksha. So that is where this concept of Kaivalya Mukti, where the result of knowledge is no rebirth, becomes important. What should be our daily prayers? Is it right to ask something particular when we pray? One of the best prayer that we even saw in Living Vedanta is to ask to Bhagwan and say, may there be Shiva Sankalpa, auspicious resolve in my mind. May auspicious thoughts manifest in my mind. Tanme manaha Shiva Sankalpam astu. In my mind and also in totality. This is a very helpful prayer because it encompasses everything. We saw in the text Living Vedanta that most of our interactions, most of our yavahara, transactions that we do, all boils down to mind. So if our prayer to Bhagwan is, may you prompt auspicious thoughts, everything else is taken care of. Is it right to ask something when we pray, something in particular? Answer to this is given by Bhagwan himself. When he describes 4 types of bhaktas, he says one of the bhakta is artharthi. Artharthi means the one who has some specific desire. But the good part is he is asking only to Bhagwan to fulfill his desire. And he is following dharmic ways to fulfill his desire. But we also have to be careful in what we ask because Bhagwan may give it. This is beautifully portrayed in the story of Dhruva. It is said Dhruva meditated on Bhagwan with a resolve and also to have a Dhruva pada, to go to Dhruva Loka. And in another place, it is said that Naradji once visits Dhruva in Dhruva Loka and he sees that he is sitting down and profusely crying. So Naradji is surprised. He asks Dhruva, why are you crying here? He says, I reached the feet of Bhagwan and I asked for something material. Instead of asking for devotion, which would be Ananya Bhakti, I asked for something, a place like this position. He says, that's why I'm regretting so much. And Naradji then gives him advice and then he continues on his journey. So that is another aspect to this, that we should be careful what we ask from Bhagwan. And the last part is, even when we ask and the result comes to us, right? Bhagwan is so compassionate that the result, once it comes to us, we should make sure we don't forget Bhagwan. It happens many a times that we ask something and it comes to us, but we just move on with our life. So this is when, if we remember Bhagwan after the result, our Shraddha deepens. Our faith that, Bhagwan is there who is my best friend, Suhrud, the word that we saw in Living Vedanta. So that Shraddha has to deepen with every interaction, every transaction. Okay. Next question here is, please explain the term Chidakasha. So there are 3 types of Akasha mentioned in Vedanta. First one is called Bhutakasha. That is the space that we generally know about. One of the 5 elements that we see here, right? Bhutakasha, in which this entire creation is accommodated. Second Akasha is Hrudayakasha. Hrudayakasha means, you call it the cave of the intellect. This word will keep coming in different places. It's also called as Dharakasha. Hrudayakasha or Dharakasha. Simple word is intellect. Take it in that sense. So first was Bhutakasha. Second was Hrudayakasha. Third one is what is being asked here, that is Chidakasha. Chidakasha means pure consciousness. Chit Akasha becomes Chidakasha. Now there is something interesting here. What is our general perception? It is, there is Bhutakasha, there is this space. In that, I am one person, and in me, there is Hridayakasha, somewhere in the cave of the intellect. And in that intellect, because Vedanta is saying, there is some little consciousness blinking inside. Vedanta says, flip it around. First comes Chidakasha, means pure consciousness. In that appears Hridayakasha, the intellect. And in intellect appears space, because in thought appears space. That is Bhutakasha. So instead of going from Bhutakasha to Hridayakasha to Chidakasha, Vedanta says it's other way around. Our main identity is Chidakasha. In that appears the middle, which is Hridayakasha. And then appears Bhutakasha. And this Chidakasha is absolute reality. And Hridayakasha and Bhutakasha are transactional reality. And this word Chidakasha is used in different texts also. Like in Advaita Makaranda, it is said, Mayi evodeti chidvyomni. Chidvyomni means that Chidakasha. Okay. Next question is, Brahman is all pervading. Or if Brahman is all pervading, then why is it said that his reflection is seen in the intellect and not Brahman himself? So there are two parts to this question. I'll also read the second part. It says, how can that all-pervading Brahman have reflection? No space for reflection, as there is nowhere where he is not. Means on one hand, you are saying Brahman is all-pervading, and then you also say it is getting reflected in intellect. So how is this reflection possible? So first part of that question was, why is it said that reflection is seen in the intellect and not Brahman himself? Brahman by nature is asanga, means it does not get associated with anything. So that is why pure consciousness never comes in contact with anything else, anatma. If it had come, then it would become sasanga. It would become, what do you say, attached. One is unattached, other one is attached. So that is why we say it is only reflection. Means whatever happens to the reflection, pure consciousness remains unaffected. Okay, that is the point here. And that is why we say only clarity of knowledge is sufficient. The whole purpose of Vedanta is to distinguish between these two, pure consciousness and reflection of consciousness. Then the second question was, if Brahman is all-pervading, then how is it getting reflected? So what Vedanta says is, it is not getting reflected somewhere outside. For example, when we take sun and reflection of sun in the water, so we can say, okay, sun is there and the reflection is taking outside of sun. But it's not the same here. That reflection also is within Brahman alone. But only thing is, Brahman is real, reflection is unreal. It's like saying, when you have a rope, and on that rope you see a snake. So the question would be, there is no space for that snake to appear in that rope, because rope is so thick, it's full. How is that snake finding space to appear in that rope? So we say, it is appearing because one is real, another is unreal. So in the same way, reflection can take place where there are two different degrees of reality. There is another interesting question here. That is, where does this reflection take place? Because in the case of sun, there was sun and then there was medium of reflection differently available. But in case of Brahman, there is no other for it to reflect. So how come this reflection is happening there? That is where Bhagavan Shankaracharya introduces and says, this is the role of Maya. What is not possible, it will make it possible. Agatita ghatana patiyasi Maya. Means what is impossible to happen, agatita ghatana, that it makes it happen. That is the nature of Maya. And one more practical point here is, the purpose of Vedanta is always to start with where we are. This we saw in our lecture also. Because we see manyness, we see many reflections happening. So Vedanta starts with that. But it will go and make us inquire into what is the real nature of this reflection of consciousness. Right? So that is the purpose of this inquiry. It will start with reflection, but help us go towards the original. Okay. What is the root cause of fear? What sadhana can we do in order to remove fear? Let us first inquire about 3 causes of fear. Before going into root cause, let us go into different causes. 3 of them we will see. First cause of fear is when we do adharma. When our conscience doesn't agree with what we have done, that is when fear will be there. Very good example of this is Dhritarashtra. When he sends Pandavas to Vanavasa, he is unable to sleep because he knows he has not done the right thing. He calls Vidurji and he says, tell me something now. Quieten my mind. It's so agitated. It's so afraid. What is going to happen next? So then Vidurji tells him about Viduraniti, and that dialogue happens in that. But the point is, whenever we do something against our conscience, that is where there is fear. Second place of fear is when there is too much attachment to something. Because we are afraid of losing that particular thing. So fear will rise from there. Simple example we can take, if we have a brand new car and we are overly attached to that car, anything happening to it, we feel afraid. So that is second. Third cause of fear is giving reality to duality. Means I see myself as different, the world as different, and Bhagwan as different. So this is a very subtle form of fear, because then the fear is, all the other fears I would say is an expression of this ignorance. Okay, then the fear is of getting something which I don't have, or protecting something which I already have. So that would be the third place of fear. Now in terms of sadhanas, for the first fear that we saw, which is adharma or doing something against our conscience, sadhana there is to follow dharma to the dot as much as we can. Means deriving inspiration from all these great Mahatmas who lived in the past, aligning our lifestyles to how they lived. This is a dialogue we need to have with ourselves. If our goal is moksha, then dharma is the prerequisite for it. And this you can see in the fearlessness of Yudhishthira. That whenever he is being asked about what is going to happen next, because of his nishtha, because of his strength in dharma, he is least concerned about anything else. Because he knows that he has always been righteous in his decisions. This is going back to law of karma, understanding how it plays in our life, and it never fails. That is the bottom line of law of karma. That was for the first one. For the second one, which is attachment, the sadhana there is to bring Bhagwan in our life. Whatever possessions we have, we should put Bhagwan in between and then start interacting with that possession. This is the symbolism or concept behind doing Graha Pravesha. So we have to have a house, we have to live in some place. But to make sure that we don't get overly attached to the house, we first offer it to Bhagwan. Graha Pravesha means that. We say, Bhagwan, this is your house. Now I will live in it as a tenant. Also, when we buy a new car, in our tradition, it is first we take it to the temple, so that we don't have that over attachment with that car. And we say, Bhagwan, now you have to protect it. May I use it to accomplish your work? Right? So that is the vision with which we should do. And for the last one, which is giving reality to duality, that is a root cause of fear, by the way. Dvitiyatvai bhayam bhavati. The solution there is to do Shravana, Manana, Nididhyasana of Vedanta. Doing it systematically, thoroughly, and also getting this conviction that Vedanta will make me fearless. So that is the process, that is the sadhana here. All right, next question is, all of creation is Bhagwan's srishti. Then why create adharma? And then teach us that we should abide in dharma. And eventually ask us to accept adharma also as Bhagwan's play. It is very hard to unlearn about dharma's superiority and accept adharma with mental equanimity. So this concept goes back to what we had seen as Ishvara Srishti and Jiva Srishti. So when we say this creation is Bhagwan's Srishti, we are talking about Ishvara Srishti. Means the 5 elements that we see, the mountains, the river, and this body, the physical body. Everything is Ishvara Srishti. There is no problem until that point. The challenge enters when Jiva Srishti comes. Means the likes and dislikes that we color on top of Ishvara Srishti. That is where we have the root of adharma. So we cannot blame Bhagwan directly for adharma because he has given us a choice that we should follow dharma. Unlike our Duryodhana, who says Bhagwan is sitting in my heart and is prompting me to do adharma. So then Bhagwan says, no, I have given you a choice that you should follow dharma. And when we say adharma is also Bhagwan's play, we should understand it as it is play of gunas. So we have sattva guna, rajo guna, and tamo guna. So whenever rajas and tamas are predominant, that is where adharma will rise. But all 3 gunas are under the control of Bhagwan, or it is consciousness, which is enlivening these 3 gunas. But Bhagwan says, don't stop at just these 2. These 2, which is Tamoguna, Rajoguna, will create adharma. Use the 3rd one, which is also my own power that I have given you. Sattva guna. That is the root of dharma. So Bhagwan says, use dharma to overpower Rajoguna and Tamoguna. This is what we see in Yudhishthira. The most sattvic person, if you see, that is Yudhishthira. In the decisions that he makes, in the way that he speaks to others, including Nakula Sahadeva, that is the expression of Sattva. That is where dharma will stay. Okay, so that is how we should reconcile both. When it said Bhagwan Srishti, Adharma, we should understand Bhagwan Srishti is Ishvara Srishti, Adharma is result of Jiva Srishti. But when it is said everything is Bhagwan's play, look at it from the standpoint of gunas. it becomes easy to reconcile in that way. And most importantly, what should we do? Right? It's not only to intellectually understand what is Ishvara Sushti, Jiva Sushti, etc. But what I have to do is follow dharma. Okay, how are we doing on time? Okay, I think we are good. All right, next question is, Vedanta logically explains why I am not the body. The body is matter, I am the seer, it is seen, etc. Personally, negating body is hardest for me. I'm not only the seer, but also the feeler of everything body goes through. I can accept I am not the body, but I cannot deny I have a body. Even a tiny mosquito reminds me that I have a body. I'm finding it hard to see the difference between being and having where body is concerned. A sadhaka may say, my body is having pain, but he cannot deny being in pain. Pain does not reduce in any way. Same pain as before, one became a spiritual seeker. One takes the medicine as a non-seeker, feels the same heat and cold, burns his hand if he touches fire. One using Viveka, or by using Viveka and assuring himself that he is not the body, does not change his experience in any way. One immediately experiences the practical benefit of negating the mind at the seat of meditation, like peace of mind, fearlessness, etc., even during sadhana stage. But without experiencing any difference in the body experience, what is the best means for a sadhaka to reinforce and abide in this teaching? So we saw this in one of the lecture, that Atman by itself cannot experience pain. Neither can body experience pain. So if you ask the question, who experiences pain? It is this in-between entity, which is Ahankara. And Ahankara is the one who becomes perceiver, feeler, thinker. All the roles are played by Ahankara. And Ahankara cannot deny experience of pain to begin with. It can mellow it down if it has strong willpower, if it has ability to shift its attention away from the body to a higher ideal, surrender. All of that will help bring the pain down, but experience will continue. So Atman will always be the witness of this pain, and Ahankara will be the experiencer of this pain. In terms of sadhana, this is our main sadhana actually. More we have done this abhyasa, practice, before pain, it is helpful to apply during pain. We all know that when body is under pain, it's very difficult to do this kind of inquiry. Even to do Shravanam is difficult, what to talk about applying that knowledge. And we should be realistic in this fact that sometimes we cannot avoid pain to physical body. That's the nature of the body. That at some point, it will start wearing out. It will start giving pain. In fact, we should use this pain to think more about nature of this body. And think about what was my understanding earlier and what is the reality of this body. And when we do that, with Bhagwan's grace and having more of this distancing from the body, it will help us face that pain better. There is another method also, which is mentioned in Yoga Vasishta. I won't go into details of that, where it is said, Samadhi Abhyasa, means withdrawing attention from this body, is a way of completely not even having perception of this pain. Some yogis who are in Himalayas, Mahatmas, who are able to completely withdraw and just be established in that state. That is not one of the fundamental solutions of Vedanta though. Vedanta is saying it's clear knowledge that Ahankara is experiencer of pain I am illuminator of this ahankara. But I just wanted to mention that because it comes in certain text. Samadhi abhyasa, which ends even perception of pain. All right. Okay. I'm not able to see a difference between ahankara and mind or thoughts. Isn't the notion of I am this or that also a thought? Yes. I am, this portion is called ahamvritti, I thought. And whatever adjectives we add, that is called idamvritti, this thought. So in I am happy, that happiness, I am happiness belongs to idamvritti. I am belongs to ahamvritti. So that is ahankara and mind you call, or other thoughts which are there. Follow up to that is this question. We learned that feeling of superiority is ahankara. Is thinking low about oneself also ahankara? Is depression manifestation of ahankara gone wrong? Very true. In Living Vedanta, Pujya Guruji mentioned a point. Atmani pujya bhavaha means having overestimation of oneself. That was called as badaka ahankara. There is another side of it, which is called Atmani Hina Bhava. Hina Bhava means thinking low about oneself. That also is form of ahankara, which Vedanta does not approve of. Vedanta says recognize the divinity within ourselves and operate from that divinity through this ahankara. And Pujya Guruji pointed out what was the nature of sadhaka ahankara? Ishvara seva dasoham means I am the dasa of Bhagwan. So neither am I looking at myself as inferior nor as superior. Now I start looking at myself as humble servant of Bhagwan, dasa of Bhagwan. Okay. Next one is, what is Maya Upadhi? And how Maya Upadhi or Avidya Upadhi is different from thoughts and the gross world. So Upadhi word means staying close, it projects its attribute on something else. Like we saw in that example famous in Vedanta is crystal and cloth. So wherever that Upadhi is close, the cloth, staying close to that crystal, it will project color of that cloth on that crystal. So Maya or Avidya Upadhi is called primordial ignorance. Okay, Mula Vidya, that is this one. And what it does is, it veils and projects. So it veils my nature as Brahman and projects my nature as Ahankara. It veils the substratum of creation as the same Atman, Brahman, and projects Nama Rupa. So this is the power of Maya Upadhi. And what is the difference between Maya Upadhi and thoughts and the gross world? One is the cause, another is the effect. Maya Upadhi is the cause. Thoughts, gross world, etc., everything is come from this cause. The effect has come from this cause. And the cause is subtle or unmanifest rather. Cause is unmanifest and the effect is manifest. That is the difference. Okay, next one is, how does Bhagwan become creation? If there is no desire in God, why is there creation? That is true. Bhagwan has no desires. Apta kamasya kaspruha means one who is fulfilled, why would he have any desire? Creation comes into being or comes into manifestation because jivas have their set of karmas which they need to experience. So for each jiva to experience certain karma phala, it is said 14 worlds get created. Appropriate circumstances, surroundings have to be created so we can enjoy or not enjoy, go through our karma phala. Because not every karma phala is enjoyable, right? But the point is, Bhagwan doesn't have desire. But Jiva's karma phala, the desires that Jivas entertained, had to be fulfilled or experienced through this karma phala. Why is there a creation? There is one, what is Vedanta's view on that? It says it's nature of consciousness to express in this way. That Brahman will express as this entire creation. Devasyesha subhavoyam, and that last quarter is what I mentioned earlier, apta kamasya kasvaha. It is the nature of this consciousness to express as this creation. So we should use or take help of the creation to turn back within. Okay, that is the whole purpose of doing this study about creation, thinking about different aspects of creation, how it came about, Panchikarna. All of that will tie back into this point, that it's from consciousness alone this creation is come about and it's appearing. Okay, the last question is, the verse 15 in Viveka Chudamani says that we need to learn how to contemplate and how to think about Atma Tattva. How can I learn Atma Tattva or contemplation thinking via meditation? Basically, what should we think? How do we contemplate when our eyes are closed? Should we just think about Om? So there are two types of meditation which is helpful for a seeker. First type, let us just call it as devotional meditation, where we meditate upon consciousness pervading one form of Bhagavan. So we take attributes of Bhagavan and just meditate on that beautiful form. Or take some quality of Bhagavan which we can relate with and just focus our mind on that particular quality. And this quality is something where we feel or we understand that Bhagavan is someone who will help us on our spiritual path, who will give me these virtues, who will give me the qualifications necessary to move forward on this path. So like that, we can meditate on Bhagavan, also on the physical attributes, qualities, or virtues. So that is first one. Then we have another one, which is Vedantic meditation, where the meditation process becomes secondary. What is primary is Shravanam. Means clearly hearing about what is the essence of Vedanta. Means I am Brahman. The individual illuminator of my thoughts is a substratum of this creation. Now this is a statement, right? That statement has to become clear, either through different logic that we want to use, or by studying some text. Different texts that we study will help clarify different points over here of how this statement is true. And once those doubts have been resolved, then I can sit down for meditation and start correcting my erroneous notions. So first step is called Shravanam, where I clearly hear, and this is where I will need a lot of qualification in terms of being able to sit in one place and just focus my mind for 1 hour on a consistent basis to Vedanta. And when I'm able to do that, and all my doubts have gotten resolved, then I can pick some pointers and then meditate. So like, for example, if I take Asanga. Asanga means unattached. So nature of Brahman, Atman is unattached. So in meditation, that would be the point I'll be dwelling on, where you try to keep all the things aside which are contrary to this understanding. Ahankara. I am Ahankara. If you say, this statement will not be true. Ahankara is not unattached. So I say, I am Brahman, whose nature is to be Asanga. And in that Asanga Brahma, Ahankara appears. In Asanga Brahma, mind appears, body appears, and so on. Okay, so in that way, this would be Vedantic meditation, where we withdraw our attention from everything else and then dwell exclusively on nature of Brahman. So with that, we are concluding here. We're almost at the end of our time. So thank you all for joining, and we have some announcements. So please stay back. And I hope the Living Vedanta series that we had was helpful. And we will continue with more texts as we take up, after this summer camp is done. Hari Om.